Well, Mark, welcome back, and thank you for joining us again here at PROS. We're delighted to have you, and we wanted to really bring the audience up to speed with the continuing work that we're doing around the Innovate to Dominate series. So maybe you could just reintroduce yourself to the audience, because I'm sure we have a lot of new viewers, and just bring them up to speed on what the Innovate to Dominate project really is.
I'm Mark Dancer. I'm a fellow for the NAW Institute for Distribution Excellence. My business is the Network for Business Innovation. Innovate to Dominate is the 12th edition in the Facing the Forces of Change series. It's different than the past in that it's not a report on trends. It's very much a roadmap to help distributors innovate now and in the future. So the whole Innovate to Dominate project is really about providing distributors the tools they need, not just to survive, but to thrive and lead in the digital age.
Now, given that we're entering into the second half of a very challenging year, there's been, obviously with COVID, such volatility in supply, demand, broken supply chains, real challenges around correct pricing, optimization, pressures on margin, pressures on costs. Distributors have had to effectively rip up their 2020 business plan and start again. This dramatic move to digital. So this research, this book is probably more relevant than ever. So maybe you could just talk about where we are now and of course this new normal that distributors are working to, and how that book really does fit in.
Yeah, I think there's probably two things. One, I learned a lot as I spent about a year researching it and really running a lot of brainstorming sessions with distributors. My mission was to go out, and after I talked with distributors about how far they had gotten and how far they wanted to go, what was holding them back, we went out and found innovation practices, and I brought them back. We brainstormed about how they could use them, and then that became the book. So there's two things I think that really stand out for COVID. One is just mindset, right? This is the fifth book that I've written for NAW. The others were more about digital transformation. But over the 6 or 8 years that I've been researching and writing and working with distributors, helping them prepare for the future, I've seen a real mind shift in terms of how distributors think about where they can take their company. Years ago, when I first started, distributors were primarily reactive. Now they are very proactive. And I think we saw that in the COVID crisis, right? And it comes down to one of our key findings. The very first chapter in the book, it's called Enable the Future of Business. And the idea is that as distributors are thinking about modernizing or innovating their own business model, the path to the future is really about understanding where customers need to go and then helping them get there. And by figuring out how to help customers get to the future, distributors will find the best things that they should do in their own business model. And that was the model for many distributors in COVID. It was really a community call to action. And distributors got close to their customers if they weren't already close to them. They figured out how they could help them. And they established, lines of communication that can be maintained as we hopefully get through this crisis and move on, right? Distributors have really, in working with customers and helping them get through the crisis, get to the future, established new conversations and relationships that they can use to drive their innovations going forward.
Now, we're halfway through the year, but we're also halfway through an important podcast series that you've put together, and we've already interviewed some really interesting companies and some diverse companies talking about these challenges. Alibaba as an example, and world-class, I would say digitally forward distributors. So maybe you could just talk about, and we had a webinar with Mike DeCarter. So there's been a lot of material that you've already done around the book and around this innovation.
Yeah, the podcast series and the webcast with Mike DeCarter have been just absolutely amazing, right? I've learned things. I continue to learn things. I think everybody can learn things from them. One of the findings from Innovate to Dominate is that strategy is not a point-in-time effort. you cannot come up with a strategy and plan on implementing it for the next 2 or 3 years. Things are changing so fast. Every distributor needs to have a framework for innovation and have their eyes open and their ears open and listen. And the podcast really helps with that. I think as my sort of number one takeaway from it, and there's so many, but one of the most important takeaways is that every distributor has to have an integrated strategy for how their digital transformation, their omni-channel capabilities, whether or not they're going to use virtual markets, and of course, very, very important, how they're going to serve customers going forward. They need to have a strategy for that, right? And from Mike Takata's input, as well as the inputs from the podcast, we have, an experienced distributor leader and 4 thought leaders and service providers. And if you listen to every podcast, I think you almost cannot come away with really powerful ideas for your own integrated strategy.
Yeah, and I mean, Mark talks about the rapid change and needing to be agile, and he named, nearly 40, specific strategic changes that he made to the business with his leadership team and implemented, very, very quickly to get ahead of that new normal, and it's just so important. And that move to digital is a thread that is constantly coming across the interviews that you've done and the work that you continue to do.
Yeah, Mike's inputs are critical, right? I think sometimes the word innovation is a little bit uncomfortable for distributors, right? We don't do R&D as an industry, and so innovation can be a term which is kind of out there. But Mike talks about his changes in the frame of continuous improvement, which I think almost every distributor is aware of, and many, if not most, are following that practice. The unique thing about Mike is that he provides very strong leadership and the expectations that the company will move forward. So for him and for Lawson Products, continuous improvement is really not just about getting really, really good at what you already do. It's about moving forward in incremental steps towards the future. And those because of his leadership and the North Star he provides for his company, all the incremental changes of continuous improvement add up to really big, powerful, sustainable differentiation for his business. It's huge.
And the wonderful thing is, Mark, that Mike's agreed to do a follow-up. So on July the 16th, yes, we're going to be talking to Mike again to dig into the latest innovations and changes and improvements. And he's agreed to talk, very candidly about this. So that's wonderful that's coming up on July the 16th, right?
Absolutely, because I think the first webcast was really recorded before or at the early stages of the COVID crisis. And so now we'll have a distributor who's very forward thinking and has a lot of momentum, and we'll be able to kind of learn what strengths they carried into the COVID crisis and how the COVID crisis made them stronger and where they're going in the future. So it should be a great bookend to the series.
Well, thank you for that, Mark. And we would encourage distributors to get involved. If they go to pros.com/NAW, they can engage with the podcast series that we're in the middle of, look at the previous webcasts and sign up for the future webcast, which is going to talk in more detail and more practical steps about how they can get involved. Mark, thank you so much for the update. And as always, it's such a pleasure to work with you and the team at the NAW. And we continue to promote this innovation and give that practical advice of how do they make those improvements on a continuous basis. And we will stay in touch and with further updates. And please stay safe and all the very best. And thank you for joining us again, Mark.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for having me. Thank you for getting the word out. And thank you for supporting my work as a fellow for the NAW Institute for Distribution Excellence.
Well, as pros, it's an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.